Let's get ready to work on the energetic highways of the seat. So in this class, we'll focus on stressing and stretching the myofascial sheaths in association more with the meridian pathways, which simply means I'm going to talk to you more of which meridians we want to stress than the muscle group. I will refer to both so that you'll have that kind of reference, but our priority right now in this class is to kind of go through the elements that also work the seat. So we'll be working with the kidney and the bladder meridians, the spleen and the stomach, and also the liver and the gallbladder meridians. Whenever I want to work lower body, muscle or meridian, I usually go towards a toe tingle pose. So just come onto your hands and knees. It's a great way to start to stress the lower body through a simple pose in which you're just tucking your toes under, sitting onto your heels, and depending on the intensity that you would like in this pose, you can either just fold forward and remain here. This will be less intense, or go ahead and sit back onto your heels. And we'll hold this for 2 minutes. As you settle into the pose, you can make yourself more comfortable by swaying the weight of your body from one side to another. Opening and closing your mouth a couple of times to loosen the jaw. And taking a couple of deep breaths, inhaling through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. Just feeling the stretch in the plantar fascia, the Achilles tendon, and also the compression that we're giving towards the front part of your foot and the ankle. So we're actually stressing the meridians in different ways. We're, through this stretch, accessing the bladder, the kidney meridians, and the plantar fascia, the back sheath, the Achilles tendon, and then through the compression, the spleen, the stomach meridian. Go ahead and just release your feet. Take a short rest in child's pose. So this is a counter pose for the same meridian work. And the opposite. And even though I didn't mention the other meridians we're working with, so as all of them are connected to the toes. So we're actually addressing all of the meridians of the seat when we do something as simple as toe tingle. Come up onto a seated pose and stretch your legs out in front of you. So I'm going to focus in 3 poses per group of meridians. So I'm actually going to start by addressing the kidney and the bladder meridians. So we'll be doing majoritarily like forward bends, and I'll add also a back bend. Let's start with half butterfly, or whichever pose works best for you. to stretch those meridians of the kidney and the bladder, which are connected to the hamstrings. So you can do half butterfly, half shoelace, half frog. We're going to hold this pose for 2 minutes on each side, because we will hold after this asymmetric pose a symmetrical one. You don't have to necessarily fold towards the leg. You can find the direction with your torso in which you feel like you're getting an appropriate stress towards those meridian lines, towards that myofascial group of the hamstrings. Continuously relax your jaw. Relax your face. Follow the breath to the end of the exhale. And just a slight hold at the end of the exhale. And allow the inhale to come back naturally. Unwind your spine up. Let's go ahead and lay back onto your arms, straighten the leg, and take a very short rebound here before we switch sides. And other side. So bend the other leg, creating whichever pose works best for you. Folding forward. So when we're working with this combination of meridians, the kidney and the bladder meridian is associated with the water element in Chinese medicine. Just have great meridians to work with when you have low energy, when you're tired. And also wonderful meridians to work with in the winter. So again, these are tonics for your energy body. It's what we're doing through the Yin Yoga practice when we focus more on the meridian work. And I'm teaching you a little bit more here from an educational standpoint. Just going over the poses, the myofascial group that's associated with the meridian line, and some general bits and pieces of information. But if you were to do a full class on one of these meridians, you could add more elements to them to give more depth. And unwinding the spine. Lean back into your arms. Go ahead and stretch the leg out. So we won't do a full recovery rebound until we're done with this set of the kidney and the bladder meridian work. So we're actually going to very quickly continue on towards caterpillar pose. And you'll just continue here by straightening both legs. You could use some form of support underneath your knees. It might not address so much in that sense the hamstrings, especially depending on your body type. Some form of support underneath the knees is just going to help you fold forward more. But these lines, even though I'm referring to the seat, they're connected towards the muscles in your back. They go along both sides of your back. So anything that also flexes and extends the spine are also working with these meridian lines. Feet are hip distance more or less depending on what feels best for your body type. And we're going to hold this one for 4 minutes. Take all the time you need. You can start almost seated if you need to. And you could also even do an inverted pose if you wanted to. You could go into a caterpillar pose, into a snail pose, which is our inverted version of this pose, or known in Sanskrit as halasana. Follow the next exhale all the way to the end of the exhale. A slight hold of your breath. And then inhale. You can do that as many times as you need to help you release more while you're in the pose. And props are always welcome. And just note that just to rest in these poses in itself is something that is very balancing for these meridian lines and this water element and this aspect of yourself that requires that rest to be able to restore and recover. You should at some point start to notice how your body becomes more comfortable in the pose. And you should at some point even start to notice this stretch in another area that might not have been the area that it started at. You might notice now that your neck is feeling the stretch more intensely than the hamstrings or than the seat. Come back to a seated pose and just go ahead and lean back into your arms. And lay on the floor. So we won't do a full rebound yet. We have one more pose to go through before we lay on in a 3-minute rebound. Let's go ahead and lay on one side and come onto your belly. So now we'll combine Sphinx and Seal pose. Props are very welcome if you want to use a prop underneath your belly, if you want to use a block for your forehead. So we're holding this pose for 4 minutes, and we'll start with Sphinx, just on your forearms, on your elbows. So again, just notice that now what we're doing is bringing a compression towards all those lines that we were stretching before. And that is really how we coax chi in and out and throughout the body. So we have 2 more minutes left here. You can either just choose to remain on your elbows, or you can come further up into seal pose, pushing into your hands and lifting your torso up. See if in this pose it feels different to hold at the end of the inhale. So see if you can take an inhale, hold your breath at the end, and then allow for a natural exhale. Notice that there is a different state sensation between if you are in a back bend or in a forward bend. And gently making your way down. Elbows on the ground. Just allow yourself to rest. Make a pillow with your arms. Allow yourself to rest one side of your face on your arms. And we're going to go ahead and take the rebound, 3-minute rebound, just laying on our backs. Observing the sheaths that we worked, the myofascial sheaths that we worked with the poses, element, and general feeling state that the poses invited you to feel. And observing that the breath in its own natural way will invite you to start resting more as you hold the poses and as the time starts to pass. We'll start to gently take deep breaths. Move again your fingers and your toes. You can choose to sit up. Actually, let's sit up in a yang way. You can choose always yin or yang with also not only the moments that we are making transition, but also the rebound. I do really always just advise to make sure you're not adding too much yang between, because then the sensation of the class is more yang than yin. But let's go down into an active hinge pose. So just go ahead and I place my hands underneath my hips as it relieves any type of stress on my lower back, but you might not need that. Just go ahead and stretch your legs up. Bring your chin towards your chest. Lower your legs, keep them at 45 degrees, and then sit up. Now we'll go towards the front sheath. So we're going to work with the spleen and the stomach meridians associated with the the quadriceps muscle group. So anything that stretches this part. Again, this is just a introduction of certain poses but there are a whole other array of poses that also work with that group. And all of these poses are not only linked to that meridian line. For example, I could use a seal pose if I wanted to as well for spleen and stomach. We'll do half saddle. So half saddle, depending on your body type, you might not even lay back on the ground. You're just going to start by stretching both legs out in front of you. Internal rotation of the femur and bringing the foot back. Whichever leg you want, because we're going to do each side individually. Foot can be on the outside, foot can be on the top, whatever feels better. If your hip lifts off the ground a lot, see if leaning over and just allowing it to do that relieves any form of resistance. So the more I try and place this side of the hip on the ground, the more intense it's going to be. So don't fight against what your body's telling you it wants to do. And you can hold this pose at any degree. You can just stay up here. We're going to hold 2 minutes on each side. You can use a bolster and a block, or as many pillows as you need behind you. Bring your knees apart. Usually this is more comfortable for most of the body types. And just go ahead and lay back. So it depends also how far back you want to add the stress to the front sheath of the body. Something as simple as adding a block underneath your head will lessen the intensity. Something as simple as just staying seated also will lessen the intensity. You should feel a slight stretch, but no pain in the knees. Sometimes remembering the muscle group and where it ran along, you might feel that something runs along towards the top of the knee. And that's usually okay to be a point where you're feeling the stretch. What we really don't want is any lateral or medial, especially medial, pain of the knee. So that would be on the outside or on the inside of the knee. And if you're not feeling that much of a stretch, you can play with bringing the knees closer together, see if that helps you. You can play with what the leg that's straight is doing. If you want to bend that, that might add some form of a stretch. And of course, what I mentioned before, it also applies. If you wanted more, then you could actually actively with the other leg lift your hip and try and tuck the tailbone down so that you can bring this other side of the hip closer to the ground. And for some body types, that is what will help them to find a deeper stretch. But for other people, that is what will actually bring pain towards their knee. Really good pose for digestion. And just allow yourself to lean towards the straightened leg side, and from there release the other leg. It's common sometimes to feel sensitivity in that knee. You can lay on your back to take a short rebound, or you can just go ahead and recline back into your arms and take your short rebound from there. And prepare the other side. So now the other leg will find the internal rotation, bringing the foot back, top of the foot or outside of the foot. Either way works fine. And go ahead and just, again, allow your spine to rest back. And just see what feels best for you to adjust in the pose. Notice even another form of adjustment will be to sit on a block and have your hip be up. But if you raise your hip, you're probably going to have to raise your back as well if you don't want to go too deep into the back bend element. I'm adding a back bend here as soon as I start to bring my spine back. I mentioned on the other side how this is a great pose for digestion. Even Mr. Iyengar will talk about virasana, which is kind of the Sanskrit term. This would be more of like an ardha virasana, half a virasana, half a hero's pose. But BKS Iyengar spoke a lot about the benefits of virasana for digestion. And always interesting to note that digestion is not only the food that you take in, it's also an internal, an emotional process. How well do we digest certain events of our life? Feelings. So digestion is a big whole spectrum to it. Start to come out of the pose. So just start by extending the leg out that was bent, extending the knee out. Lean on towards the side of that leg. Roll onto that side of the hip and just gently roll your other leg out. Go ahead and either sit or lay on your back and take a short rebound. So we're going to continue to stimulate through a stretch, through a tension, these meridian lines of the stomach and the spleen. Just come onto your hands and knees. You could choose, and I'm going to give you actually 3 variations. All of these poses in themselves are tricky for a lot of body types, so it's good to really think of the spectrum of, I really just want to be able to stretch and stress through tension these muscle groups. How I do it is not that important. I could also add a dragon. I could add lots of other poses in here. But I'm going to propose now either a full saddle, which is your knees come apart. You can either sit between your heels. Sometimes they call that also antler pose. You could start from antler pose. You could start from seiza if you want to actually just be on your heels. And from here, you're going to start to lay back, and that would be your saddle. Now, depending on your body type, this might not be what you choose to do. So we might choose to do an asymmetrical pose of camel. And what I'm going to propose here right now is either, we're going to do 4 minutes. You're going to do either a 4-minute saddle pose or 2 minutes on each side of half camel pose. Half camel, you're just going to come onto your knees, heels, or using blocks too. Sometimes the blocks are very handy in these half versions of camel. And you're just going to lean back towards the block and raise the arm over and back. So I'm going to actually practice the camel to help guide you through. But if you decide to do the saddle pose, go ahead and lay back, and when the timer rings for the full 4 minutes, you'll be able to slowly, gently get yourself out of the pose. So those of us that are going to do camel, just come onto your knees. can tuck the toes or the tops of the feet onto the ground. Place the block behind you. Just go ahead and lean into the block and raise the other arm over your head. So notice that with half camel, I'm leaning towards my right side. So I'm feeling that stretch in the left quadricep more, especially because I raise this left arm and I'm adding more of a tensile resistance. So I'm going to add some stretch to that left side. How far you go into the pose is also completely up to you. If you want to lessen, then you might need to twist your hips a little bit and lean more towards the right. Lift that left shoulder a little further up. If you want more intensity in the back bend, then you're really bringing that left shoulder further back. I mean, you could do a full camel pose, but in that case, for the time that we're maintaining the pose, just might be better to go into saddle pose, although that saddle pose adds the flexion of the knee. So if you're going to switch sides, if you're doing half of a pose, to come out of camel, you're just going to sit back onto your heels and come out of the pose. And we'll just hold for a second here before we switch sides. Go ahead and bring the block towards the other side. If you're laying in saddle pose, just stay in saddle pose. You can sit back. Bring your spine back up if you're doing the half version. Lean onto the block. Bring the other arm up and back. So these are the meridians that are associated with the earth element. Anything earthing that is grounding will always also help your digestion. And you're going to prepare to come out of the pose. Just either sit all the way up if you're in that version of saddle, or bring your hips back down if you're in camel. Also, if you are laying back and it's comfortable to just bring the feet out and stay laying on your back, that's also depending on the body type of choice. And you can take a short rebound in whatever pose you feel like you need right now to counterbalance. Whatever counter pose, child's pose, child's pose looking at the earth, or child's pose looking at the sky. So as I mentioned before, that all of these meridians have their connection to the torso. And you can clearly see that because the torso is going to add also a certain intensity depending on where it goes. And we're actually going to complete this earth element, spleen, stomach, meridian emphasis of this class with a twist. Going into twisted roots, lay on your back. And we'll do 3 minutes on each side. Just hug your knees in. If you're going to cross, so there is a twisted roots that you could do, although twisted roots would be, if I cross the right leg over the left, I'd be bringing the knees towards the right. And just twisted roots is just crossing the legs and knees towards the left. But it kind of changes the emphasis. If I cross and I go towards the right, I'm most probably going to feel a little bit more towards the TFL. So sensation changes, but it's still a twist. And right now, one of the big reasons I'm adding this is to find that the twisting element that's just so good in general for the digestive system, and because it does create also a lengthening of the torso. So it is also working with these meridians that run also along the front sheath of the torso. Both knees together or cross the right over the left and bring your knees towards the left side. Just going to bring the knees in. If you're going to cross, you're going to cross the right knee over the left, or just allow the knees to rest one on top of the other and bring the knees towards the left side. Relax your face, your jaw, your neck. And your face can be towards the right or towards the left. So it's on, just like working all of the meridians, and here we're not going over the ones that have to do with the upper, more to do with the upper body because they're actually all connected. Something particular when we think about this earth element is that if you ever go to see a therapist, acupuncturist, or an Ayurvedic practitioner as well, they will always start in treating your health through your digestion. So usually it's kind of one of the first things they want to treat. And this also applies to, even though I mentioned before the highs and the lows of energy being associated with the kidney meridian, there is also an association with the digestive system. And how well do we absorb the nutrients from the food that we take in? And go ahead and come back to center with your knees. Just take a short pause. Rebound, even if it's a short rebound. And prepare to take the same pose towards the right side now with your knees. So now again, just bring your knees in and allow them to drop towards the right. You can cross the left knee over the right if that's something you're choosing to do. So just the neck and the head will decide intuitively if they want to lay towards the right, towards the left, towards the center. And you should try and do the same also with what you're adding in the lumbar spine. If you're adding more of a flexion, your knees are going to make their way slightly up. And just noticing how you're hugging your internal organs in with this pose. And in the twist with your breath, you can choose to play a little bit if you hold it at the end of the exhale, or if you hold it at the end of the inhale. And you'll come out of the pose. Prepare to take about a 3-minute rebound by just lengthening your legs out, releasing your arms. And relax your face. And bring your mind towards your heart center. See if you can, by bringing your mind there, feel the pulse of your heart.
Take deep breaths, move your fingers and your toes. You can come seated in a yang or a yin form. And we'll continue towards the liver and the gallbladder meridian. So we're going now down towards the wood element. And we'll be working with the inner sheath, stretching the inner sheath, which is the adductors are related to the liver. Psoas muscle is also related to the liver as well. But we'll more in general just refer to adductor muscles, and then the gallbladder, which are the glutes and the IT band. So for the next pose, you're just going to go ahead and straighten both legs out. We'll continue with dragonfly pose. So you're just gonna, you can use the wall as well if you want. You can lay on the wall and bring your legs up if that's your preferred choice. I just want to make sure that we are finding a stretch and a stress in the adductor group. You could also use frog pose as well. Props, very welcome for this pose. If you use them, you place them in front. Blocks underneath the knees as well is another choice if you wanted to. And what you're going to do from here is just slowly start to fold forward. I really say slowly because you could choose, and we're holding this for 4 minutes, you could choose to just remain seated in the beginning part and just allow the hips and the spine to feel comfortable, and then see from there if you can push into your arms and start to bring the weight of your torso forward. And then from there, see if you can bring your arms forward. And so what we're working on here, I mentioned before the wood element, and this adductors having more to do with the liver meridians. And then, of course, the pair of the wood element would be the gallbladder meridian. And so these are elements to work with whenever we're trying to do some form of a cleansing process. It doesn't only have to be physical, it can be energetic. And even though all the elements have an emotion that's associated with them, one that is often quite, for me at least, very upfront with how I feel it in relation to the emotion that's associated with it is this liver pathway and the emotion of anger. And so again, these emotions, though, they come from Chinese medicine. They also vary according to which book you're reading and how the person interprets also the feeling state. And there are also different ways of viewing the meridian lines. And I say this because even though this is one way of systemizing the pathways, the meridian pathways, there are others as well. And there are others who also systemize myofascial lines with different form of pathways, emotional pathways that are also differently placed. So again, these are just systems, different systems. And I spoke in the introduction to the energy body about 2 different energy models. And even in the same energy model, there will be lots of different systems that come about on how to structure something, or how to help present something, how to simplify something. And slowly coming out of the pose, unwinding your spine. You might have to help yourself with your arms to bring those legs together. Lean back into your arms and into your hands, and just take a short rebound. So now we'll make our way towards the gluteus group, and more specifically thinking of the meridian world, gallbladder meridian. That works with the liver meridian in a pair in Chinese medicine. I'm going to propose sleeping swan, but you can do deer pose, you can do reclined swan pose, reclined shoelace, you could also do the version with the wall. I just want to be able to access this sheath of the body. Remember, this is the deer pose, and just from deer to swan, it's just bringing that leg further back. Fold forward and explore where your spine wants to lay as it rests forward, either towards the foot or in between the foot and the knee. So these are also good meridians to work with. Liver and the gallbladder in any creative process when you're starting something. If you think of what wood represents, which is growth, it's a really good way to kind of remember in what process we can use these meridian lines and this energetic work. Not only thinking of the seasons that also come with each. This one belonging more to the springtime, the water pertaining more towards the winter, the earth also having to do with in-between seasons or the end of summertime. But also taking note that as human beings we have these cycles, our own cycles that happen depending on where we are in our life. And so we can work with these lines also on a personal view in our practice, knowing what we need more of. So moments of completion when we finished a project or when we concluded something, always wonderful to go towards that water element. In the moment when we're in transition, earth is a wonderful element, meridians to come back to and work with. And whenever we're starting something, when there's a creative process that's budding, then we can just tap into using the poses that will help us access these meridians of the liver and the gallbladder. I'm just giving you ideas on how you can use these
bits and pieces of information that I'm giving you with the practice and the poses. Go ahead and just come out of the pose. You can come out of the pose in whatever way you want, forward, backwards. You can lean into your arms, lay on your belly, lay on your back. The rebound's not too long right now. I'm holding the longer rebound for the end of this sequence. And we'll make our way towards the other leg. Other leg comes into the external rotation. I can start in deer, I can go directly to swan, do any of the other versions that you like. You really should be exploring after every lab that we do the variations that I mentioned, not just while I'm talking about them, but after. You should really make a list of the variations and really try them out and see for yourself what works better for your body type. So we're in the final minute. So even though I'm proposing a certain time frame to hold the poses, you can choose to hold less. And you can gently come out of the pose. This one I do recommend that you just bring your legs forward so that you can sequence with the last pose that we're holding. And so this last pose is just to kind of allow us to close this session, the meridian work that we did. And curiously though, it also goes into this group because butterfly pose, depending on if it's short-legged or long-legged, short-legged heels are closer, long-legged they're further away, I'm going to stress different areas of the body. So I could do, just an example here is I could do a short-legged and bring this into the wood element that we just worked, or I could bring the heels further out, and then the emphasis is more on the spine. So then I could work with that version more into the kidney and the bladder, so the water element. So it's just interesting things to really think about when there's a functional approach. That's why also with these poses, you can't just stay statically into one of them, because they could work in different groups. You know, just like I could work the swan pose in a back bend, and then that would be also what I could put into the stomach and the spleen. So just whichever one you choose to do, we're just going to fold forward and hold. 3-minute hold, just to kind of close the session before we go into a final Shavasana. So I'm really trying to allow you to dive into the stillness and the quiet that this practice brings, but you can add as much internal tools that you need to stay focused. You know, whether it is focusing on the breath, adding a short retention at the end of in this case, the exhale, so it's a forward bend. And we're at the end of the time. You can already start to gently come out of the pose. So the forward bends really are a wonderful way to close a session, as much as I also mentioned twists, depending on how intense the session was. Forward bends really kind of already bring us towards that yin state that will make us want to lay on our back and just take that Shavasana. And you can use props as you need in your Shavasana. You can use bolsters or whatever you need underneath your knees. And so since I'm just guiding you, inviting you to stay laying on your back or whatever pose you're choosing to hold for Shavasana. Just allow your bones to settle in. So where the mind goes, prana goes. We've heard that expression quite a bit. So today I gave a general session of all of the meridians from an educational standpoint. And maybe you do feel already a different vibration at the end of this session than when you're just hearing about bones and muscles. Settle fully into yourself. Observing perhaps if there's still a desire to want to continue doing. Just invite yourself over and over again back into this being state. And now the more we're into this being state, perhaps you'll notice other sensations from your practice that go beyond just the physical. Whether that be some form of current in the body, or a point of heat or cold. Or a deep insight. You can continue in Shavasana as long as you need to.